If you have decided to raise your children bilingually, you've sat down, you've come up with a wonderful family language plan, you have the determination, you've decided you're going to stick to it and everything is going to work out great. Until something happens and suddenly your plan is not going to work anymore. Hello and welcome to Live Your Language, tips and inspiration for your bilingual life. I'm Stephanie, a PhD student in second language acquisition and a mother to 2 children that I'm raising to be trilingual. Yes, I said trilingual. So in this video, I'm going to talk about what you can do that can help you through those situations so that you can come out through this mini crisis on the other end with a plan that works for your family and that you're pleased with. So my very first tip is not to panic. So I know this is easier said than done, and I can't say that I took my own advice when the situation happened to me, which I'll discuss at the end of the video. Bilingualism is more broad than people realize. You know, just because your child isn't speaking a language, it doesn't mean they can't end up as a passive speaker of that language. And there are lots of stories where children are passive speakers of a language for basically like their entire lives. You know, their parents will speak to them in the minority language, they'll respond in the majority language, and then you know, one day they study abroad or they visit family, or for one reason or another they're put into a certain situation that requires them to speak that minority language. In other words, they actually are met with a communicative need to use that language, and suddenly they become active speakers of that language or productive speakers of that language. So just remember that just because something's not working out right now and that maybe the ratio of the language is going to drop a little bit lower than you would be comfortable with, if the situation continues, lower than what would be required to have a speaker of a language, just remember that you know, life is long, children are resilient, and it doesn't necessarily mean that your child won't end up bilingual, and it doesn't mean that they won't end up as a speaker of that language. My second piece of advice to you is to really start to think flexibly. Just remember that there are really only 2 things that are required to have a bilingual child, and that is an adequate amount of input and a communicative need. So if those 2 things are present, your child should end up as a bilingual child. I think sometimes we get so wrapped up in our plan, we just like get married to this plan and like this is what we know, this is like what's going to work for us and this is what we really want, and we start to think, kind of get like tunnel vision, like we start to mistake the plan as it is with having a bilingual child, which is not true. So just remember there are a lot of ways to get adequate input and there are a lot of ways to create a communicative need. Now those are not always easy, they're not always cheap, but there are a lot of different paths to get to those 2 things. So the third piece of advice I have for you is to return to your goals. So if you wrote a family language plan, you probably prioritized various languages and what you wanted your child to be able to do in those different languages. For instance, you might have said, you know, it's really important for my child to speak Spanish because my parents speak Spanish, our whole family speaks Spanish, and I really, really, really want them to be able to communicate with my parents who don't speak English or whatever the majority language is. However, maybe you wrote into your family language plan that you wanted your children to be able to go to this bilingual immersion school, and then you find out that they only take a certain amount of kids, or only from a certain district, or only from a certain age, and you're crushed because you knew this was going to be the way that they were going to be perfectly bilingual and it was just going to take care of itself. But when you go back to your goals, you remember that you really just wanted them to be able to communicate with your family, not necessarily to read and to write and to be a functioning student in that language. So maybe you can start to think about ways that they can get that speaking element down. You know, sometimes we really get attached to our plan, and we just had to be a little bit more flexible and just go back to the basics, go back to the goals. Remember what at its core is the reason that you want to have bilingual children, and just go from there. My next piece of advice to you is to start from there to rebuild the puzzle. So making a family language plan really is like a puzzle, especially when you have children of different ages, of different proficiencies, and of different needs. So for example, in our situation, I have a 1-year-old and I have a 3-year-old. Obviously the 3-year-old had way more French input than the 1-year-old, and the 3-year-old also has social needs. Like, he needs to go and speak to other kids his age, he needs to interact, he needs to like get out of the house. And a lot of times when we have the little one, because he has so many naps, we don't always get to get out and about. So something that he would really need is some sort of social activity like preschool or some play group or something like that. So when you have all these different needs to balance and differences in proficiency and that sort of thing, it really does truly become like a puzzle. So when you revisit your goals, you're going to start to rebuild the puzzle and just remember what is most important to your family and prioritize that. And from there, you start to piece in little things that are going to support those goals. And the 5th thing I want to mention is that you should look ahead. So remember that the situation that you're in right now, just like your children's level of language, is fluid, it's dynamic, it's always changing. So the situation might seem a little difficult right now. Maybe there's going to be a little bit more of the majority language in your life than you would like. Just remember that this is probably temporary until you can find another solution that works better. And I know that with kids, time is of the essence, and you just have to remember that, it takes a lot of time for a language to get to the point where they can't use it anymore. You don't have forever, but if you can just kind of keep it alive for long enough until you can get to a situation where you can enroll them in that preschool or that immersion program or get them a nanny or whatever, that's all that it takes. So when you're looking ahead, remember, A, that it's not permanent, B, that you might be able to start working towards the next opportunity that you can have for them. So you might not have an au pair now, but you might be able to start searching or arranging things in your life so that you have that opportunity. You might not be able to enroll your kids in preschool or whatever right now because you're about to move, but you can start looking in your new town to see what there is there. You can start connecting with other people, with other minority language groups in the area and that sort of thing. So you can kind of look at this as an opportunity to prepare them for the next stage while you start to really strategize about how you're going to keep these languages alive. And not just alive, but thriving. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about how I went through this with our situation. So in my last update video, I mentioned our au pair was coming this summer and she was going to be from a French-speaking country. Well, it turns out that she had a serious car accident that was going to require her to have some leg surgery, and it was going to be a lengthy recovery, and we're really thankful that she is okay, but she unfortunately wasn't going to be able to continue in the au pair program, and I think that her road to recovery was going to be really long because it was a very serious accident. So that left us really scrambling, trying to figure out what we're going to do for childcare. So remembering that what they need is an adequate amount of input and a communicated need. There are some things that are going to fit that bill and there are some things that aren't. The things that are going to result in a bilingual child, so like the big opportunities for a lot of interactive input are the first things that I'm going to try and figure out. So the sources of French input that we have are me, really, and then the other things that will be really helpful but won't necessarily result in a bilingual child alone would really be like hiring a babysitter that speaks French to spend a couple hours every weekend with them, so that I can get some PhD work done. That'd be really great. I also looked at hiring a foreign exchange student that might be able to come play with the kids for a little bit. I've gotten a lot more lax on my son playing with electronic toys as long as they're in French, because it provides another source of input. So those little things, by themselves, those little things aren't going to, create a bilingual child. But, when you add them all together, they really do increase the amount of input that he's getting in French. Now, with my youngest son, obviously it's very important for me to have a lot of French input for him, because I really wanted French to be established before we introduced another language in the fall of Spanish. So I'm really thankful that I'm able to spend at least half of the day, half of the week with him at home. So he is getting, like, you know, aside from his nap time, like 100% of his interactive input is with me in French. And I've really been trying to be super intentional about our interactions together. I've been trying to, like, turn off the podcast, turn off all the things that will take my attention away from him, and to really interact a lot more with him, just so that we're making the most of that time together. Now, when the au pair comes in the fall, so, like, thinking ahead, it turns out that it worked out really well because my oldest son is actually doing really well learning Spanish right now. He's definitely learning Spanish, and I think that that's really going to facilitate his learning with the au pair. So, you know, if we step back and look at the progression of how Spanish worked out for us, so we kind of had like a soft introduction just by, you know, talking, you know, little bits of the day, translating. We worked up to our morning binder, and I'll put a link for that below if you're interested. It was from Mama Yama Linguist, and we really loved it. And then that kind of prepared him for, you know, a smooth transition into the Spanish immersion bilingual preschool. And that is going to prepare him for his time with the au pair. You know, had we done it in the reverse, it would be really difficult. So I think that my son's progression into Spanish is going to work out really well. So we haven't quite decided if we're going to have him stay in the preschool while the au pair is with my youngest son during the day. To be frank, we don't really know how much interaction my oldest son is going to have with the au pair, because she'll probably be off duty when he comes back from school, and it just depends on how much she's around. But you know, that said, his Spanish development, I think, is going to go just fine. If anything, it's going to kind of tilt the scales in favor of Spanish, which, you know, we'll have to deal with that, you know, reassess when we get to the fall and decide what to do at that point. With my youngest, so the plan for the au pair is that she will replace his part-time daycare, but she will be full-time. So what I'm going to have to do is probably try and flex my schedule and my studies and all those sorts of things to try and do as much as I can while he's asleep. So I'm going to wake up really early and try and get a lot of work done so that I can spend more time with him during the day, and, you know, maybe give the au pair some time to, like, do another task while I'm with him. So I'm not really sure, you know, I'm just gonna try and stay flexible, see what the situation is, and what sorts of opportunities arise that allow me to spend more time with my youngest son in French, just so that Spanish doesn't overtake French, you know, since I'm really the only source. And that said, you know, I've been looking at other sources. So like I said, you know, I also plan to, my oldest is going to be in Saturday school, so that's going to be 3 hours a week on Saturdays starting in the fall. My youngest won't be in Saturday school, but, you know, when my oldest is in Saturday school, he will be with me probably, and that'll be, you know, more one-on-one time. I'm also looking at possibly hiring a babysitter to spend a little bit of time on Saturdays, you know, with the children, or maybe Sundays, I don't know, it depends. So basically we're gonna play it by ear, but right now, you know, French is taking a tiny bit of a backseat to Spanish, which is gonna really be here in full gear in the fall. So stay tuned and you guys will learn how we adjust everything based on our new situation. So anyway, I really hope that it helped you to kind of see the way I approached our surprise language situation change. And I hope that it encourages you just to stay flexible, to remember your goals, and to remember to really step back and keep everything into perspective, right? You know, bilingualism is a long arc, and if you just keep at it and inject language wherever you can, however you can, you know, do your best to keep that little flame alive. You know, you never know, down the road you may stumble upon a great opportunity that's going to give you a lot more input in one or in your minority language or in one of your minority languages. And that time, that interim time that you may have been feeling a little bit, discouraged about your language, may all have been worth it because, you were just, injecting little bits of language here and there wherever you could. So anyway, I hope you feel encouraged. If this is your situation, please don't be discouraged. Keep up with it. Don't abandon your dream of having a bilingual child. You can do it, and the only way to fail is to give up. So don't give up. Okay, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.